Hi and welcome to another Carpenter Tutoring tutorial. I'm Amy and today we are going to go over a quick review of completing operations with negative numbers. So I'm calling this the operations with negative numbers cheat sheet so that you can come back and look really quickly to find patterns when you're adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing negative numbers. During this video, I'm going to use n to represent a negative number, p to represent a positive number, and then if I write an uppercase letter, either uppercase n or an uppercase p, that means that the value represented by the uppercase letter is the value in that problem further away from 0. Let's start with addition. With addition, if I'm adding together two values with the same sign, then my answer is also going to have that same sign. So a negative number plus a negative number equals a negative number, and a positive number plus a positive number equals a positive number. So our trick for adding together the same sign is ignore your signs at the beginning and just add your two numbers together as if they were positive numbers. And then at the end, throw the sign in front of your answer that matches the signs you were using to add together. So for example, if I had two negative numbers together, I would forget their negative signs for a minute, add together the values of their numbers as if they were positive, and then put a negative sign in front of that answer. If we're working with different signs in addition, things get a little bit trickier, and it depends on which value is further away from 0. So again, what we can think about is, the good news is that we're always looking for the difference between the positive versions or the absolute values of our two numbers. So for example, if I have a negative number further away from 0 and a positive number that's a little bit closer to 0, what I have to do is find the difference between these two values. And then the sign of the answer matches whichever value in my addition problem was further away from 0. So in this case, since I have a negative number which is further away from 0, I would expect a negative answer whose number, not sign, but just number on its own, is the difference between the absolute value of the negative number and the positive number that we started with. If we start with a larger positive number and add a negative number, we'll end up with a positive answer, which is again the difference between the positive number we started with and the absolute talk about in the abstract. So let's consider for a second something like -7 plus 3. So this is matching the first section in our different signs examples. First, I look at the absolute values of these two values. So I'm really considering at this point 7 and 3 and ignoring the negative sign on the 7. The difference between 7 and 3 is 4. So I know that should be the number of my answer. And then the sign of my answer depends on whichever value was further away from 0 and what its sign was. Well, -7 is further away from 0 than 3 is, so the negative sign wins. That's going to dominate and dictate the sign for the answer, so this will be a -4. We'll see that we have pretty much the same patterns for subtraction, but they work in the opposite situations. So in subtraction, when I have different signs being subtracted, I actually have to find the sum of those absolute values. So for example, a negative number minus a positive number, I can consider just the absolute value of the negative number at this point and add those two values together, the absolute value of the negative number and the positive number. When I add those together, that is going to be the number of my answer, but the sign of the answer is determined by whichever sign comes first in our original problem. Negative comes first, so I'll expect this to be a negative answer. If I reverse the order, we'll see that the sign of our answer also changes. So if I have a positive number minus a negative number, again, I'll ignore the sign on the negative number for a second and consider its absolute value. I'll take the positive number plus the absolute value of the negative number, and that will give me my sum, or the number of my answer. And then the sign of the answer should be positive because the first number in this problem was positive. Subtraction gets a little bit trickier when we have the same sign. Here we have to find the difference between these numbers, and specifically between the absolute values of these numbers. This is also a place where distance from 0 matters, so I'll have to use some uppercase letters as well. If we have a negative number that's further from 0 minus a negative number that's closer to 0, We know that we have to take the difference of these values because they have the same sign, and then the sign is determined by the location of the value that's further from 0. If we get the value further from 0 first, we keep the same sign. So this will be the difference between the absolute value of these two numbers, but it will still be a negative value. If we reverse the order and have the negative number closer to 0 minus the negative number further from 0, our number is actually going to stay the same because it's still the difference between their absolute values, but it's going to become a positive answer. We'll see the same kind of pattern with our positive numbers. If I start with my positive number further away from 0 and subtract a positive number closer to 0, I'll still have a positive answer, although that answer will be the difference between our two positive numbers. This is really just a normal subtraction problem. But if I have the positive number closer to 0 come first and then subtract the positive number further away from 0, I'll end up with a negative answer whose number is still the difference between the absolute values of these two numbers. One number example using these might be helpful. So let's consider something like 5 minus 14. I see that I have the same sign of numbers, they're both positive, and so I can think about this as the difference between the absolute value of these two numbers. Well, the difference between 14 and 5 is 9. And now to decide my sign, I have to think about where the value further from 0 is. 14 is the value that's further from 0, and it comes second. According to our patterns, that tells us that we're going to end up with a negative answer. So my answer will be negative 9. The good news is that addition and subtraction are the two trickiest operations to think through. Multiplication and division are much simpler. In both multiplication and division, if I multiply or divide two numbers with the same sign, their answer is always going to be positive. So a positive times a positive will equal a positive, and a negative times a negative will also equal a positive. For division, a positive divided by a positive will equal a positive, and a negative divided by a negative will equal a positive. If our two values have different signs, that means that our answer will be negative. So a positive times a negative is a negative, and a positive divided by a negative is also a negative. Even if we switch this and have negative times positive, that's still a negative, or negative divided by positive, that's also still a negative answer. So here is your operations with negative numbers cheat sheet. You can use these patterns to help you with any problem. I hope this cheat sheet has been helpful and will help you with future work that you have to do with negative values. As always, please let me know in the comments if there are any other topics you'd like to see covered or discussed. Thank you so much for spending part of your day with me, and I'll catch you next time.